You're listening to Big Blend Radio with Nancy and Lisa. We're the publishers of BigBlendMagazines.com. And our next guest is Harvey Simon, and he's a writer, but his debut novel just came out this month, September. It's called The Madman Theory, and I love this. I want to put that for all politics. It's a great title. It's just been released. It's available in paperback, also as an ebook if you go to Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, all those great places, but it's always good to connect directly with the author and check out what's going on. Go to his website. It's madmantheory.com. Harvey, it is a wonderful opportunity to have you on the show with us. How are you?
Good. Thank you very much for having me.
Hey, we've been talking a little bit about history and nature, but this is a little different.
Yeah, different is the right word.
Yeah, different. Well, we're talking about the Cuban Missile Crisis, and I know, number one, congratulations on the Madman Theory being out. I know that's your debut novel, but, boy, you don't start small, do you? You're just going to go right for it.
Well, it took me a long time, but I was aiming for to have it come out in conjunction with the 50th anniversary, which is next month.
Yeah.
It happened in 1962, if you don't want to do the math. And so this is the perfect time to talk about it.
What was it that even, because I know we're going to talk a little bit about the Cuban Missile Crisis, kind of refresh people's memories, and some of us need it. Some of us need to relearn it.
I heard somebody ask where did the Cuban Missile Crisis occur?
Mm-hmm. Oh boy. Okay.
Well, people have short memories.
Yeah, and some of us weren't even around then, such as myself. But it was interesting getting into your book, and I'm going, oh yeah, we learned about this in history. And I was in a different country growing up, but you did learn about this. Mm-hmm. And it was like, this was one of those big things when you start thinking about missiles and what could really happen with them. And Harvey, I'm just going, your whole book kind of goes with what's going on now even, between elections and just kind of that whole threat of what could happen to our country.
Right. I think the election and what's happening with Iran, because we seem to not want to let Iran get nuclear weapons, and we can sort of see what happened when in the 60s when nuclear weapons came close to our doorstep. So there is some of a parallel there.
Now, in reading your book, a lot of the history of it is actually factual, but you've kind of twisted the story in that what would happen if Nixon was in power instead of JFK.
Right.
And go ahead.
Well, I mean, there's been plenty of books written about the crisis itself, about what really happened. Oh, and I didn't want to write a novelize that, but I thought it would be more interesting to think about what might have happened, or what the way I think about it is what almost really did happen. Mm. Because one way of looking at it is actually Nixon, when he was running for president in 1960, he was vice president at the time. Eisenhower was president, and one day he was getting out of his limousine, and he bumped his knee. And his knee became infected, and he went into the hospital. And he was there for quite a while, and he lost an awful lot of weight. And he and soon after, right after he got out of the hospital, he had his first television debate with Senator John Kennedy. And he looked terrible. He lost so much weight, but he didn't get a smaller collar size for his shirt. He kept the same size shirt. So his shirt was too big, and he was still a little sick. He looked terrible. And so bumping his knee on the car door could have, you could argue, cost him the election.
And there was Kennedy with all that hair.
Right, and the irony is that Kennedy had Addison's disease, which was coming close to killing him, and the other irony is that Addison's gives you like a tan, makes you look brownish. So he looked great, even though he was deathly ill in his own way.
Now, do you think we've changed up a little bit just in the medical testing of our presidents compared to then?
Oh, definitely. I mean, if we knew, Kennedy just would not qualify. I mean, first of all, he talked about wanting to sleep with a different woman every day. And literally, he said if he didn't, he got a headache.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of proof in that pudding too.
and he was very ill, man. So between those two, I think that those would have disqualified him today. Would disqualify him today.
That maybe back then one was very serious looking and almost bordering on mean.
Nixon.
And
well,
the other one,
look at the cover of the Madman Theory, and Nixon looks like, dude, he's going to blow us all up.
and serious and mean.
He does have that. He does.
And the other one is like, hi, I got a lot of hair and I like women.
And I've got hair.
Right. Who are you going to vote for?
I know, and I think a lot of women voted. That maybe normally didn't vote.
Well, this is interesting, Harvey, because a lot of people are talking about that now. It's like, are we voting like American Idol for our president?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the funny thing is that Nixon was by far more experienced than Kennedy. He had been vice president for 8 years. He had traveled extensively around the world. He had been senator. He had been congressman. He was probably the most experienced candidate in the country that could have run for president. And Kennedy was probably the least experienced person. He was a senator for a short time, and he had been in the House for a short time, but he was considered basically a lightweight and a playboy. And in Congress, he wasn't taken seriously.
But wasn't there also the thing that I believe he was the first Catholic to win?
He was. That was unprecedented.
And that was kind of like, was that a pro or a con? Because,
well, if you were Catholic, it was a pro.
Yeah.
But a lot of people, there was a lot of prejudice at the time against Catholics, and I'm sure he lost votes because of it. And it was a big issue in the campaign.
I remember my parents arguing about it.
But then look at here now. We're looking at, Mitt Romney is a Mormon, and then there's, a whole percentage of the country thinks President Obama is a Muslim.
Right.
I'm just saying.
And not born in the U.S.
Yeah. So there's that whole issue again. So I just think, are we repeating history, or did we not learn anything, or did we, or what's up with us?
Well, the irony about 1960 and the Cuban Missile Crisis is that you would think we'd be safest with the most experienced person, and Nixon was definitely the more experienced of the two candidates, but yet it was Kennedy who saved the world. So go figure.
So it actually boils down to negotiation skills sometimes,
Negotiation and who you are as a person.
And who has more negotiation skills than a playboy? Well, I'm just saying.
Well,
there's a guy who buys you a drink and chats you up, and then there's a guy who walks up and says, do you want to, which one wins?
Well, wow.
See?
Harvey, welcome to Big Blend Radio.
I didn't realize I was going to take this course.
Well, it happens. But I want to know why I know that, you've been writing for a number of years and also have done a lot in history too. But I know you are also in national security, and you're a national security analyst at Harvard. So you've got that side of you. But what was it about this particular event that kind of made you? What even made you think about if Nixon was president at that point?
Well, I remember reading a review of a book that had come out about the election and how close it was. It was so close that if 20,000 people in 3 states had gotten up on the other side of their bed on election day and voted for the other candidate, Nixon would have won. It was the closest election in history. So my mind just went from there to I wonder what a Nixon presidency would have been like, since we almost had one. Mm-hmm. And then I thought, I wonder what the missile crisis would have been like if Nixon had been president. And then I thought, well, I'd make an interesting book. And I had never written fiction before, so I thought if I could, have these facts to ground me and real people to ground me, I might be able to sort of make that leap from nonfiction to fiction.
There's just this underlying feeling that we might not be here if Nixon was
right. Well, the end. I'm not going to give away the ending of the book, so you won't find out the answer to that question until the end of the book.
I just remember in, I think it was junior high school or high school, kids running around and saying, Nixon, Nixon, he's our man.
That's right, he's the one. Right.
Yeah, and I was like, who the hell's Nixon? I had other things on my mind. And I remember my parents arguing, about the election and stuff, and thinking, who cares? And then I remember one girl, that was she was very intelligent and a lot more into history and politics than I was, right? Mm-hmm. I was more musician art. And she was very into, I remember we had to do current events, and she loved it, and I was like, oh, God. And, she was just like, we're going to go to war. We're all going to get blown up. And I'm like, oh, come on. Mm-hmm. And there were a lot of kids that were really, really deathly afraid.
During the missile crisis you're talking about?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, when Kennedy first found out that the Soviet Union had put nuclear missiles in Cuba, his first instinct was, we will be going to war. His instinct was, we're going to bomb Cuba or something, invade, maybe bomb, but somehow take military action against Cuba. And that probably would have led to nuclear war, and we wouldn't be talking now. Mm-hmm. Washington wouldn't be here, and nobody would be sitting where I am.
Right. But I think that there's also money that's made in this. So there's that also who's being funded behind the scenes.
How do you mean?
Well, I think that somebody always makes money in war somewhere.
Not that kind of war.
And I think in this is a little different.
If there was a nuclear, we shouldn't, on the one hand, maybe we shouldn't make fun of it, but if there was a nuclear war, it would be, like a massive rebuilding project, right. Certainly. But I think that nobody really would win in a nuclear war.
Right. It is.
Washington, you wouldn't be able to even you wouldn't even be able to rebuild Washington or the other cities that were destroyed because they'd be radioactive.
Right. So the thing is I like the Madman Theory because here the threat has always been. We can keep arming ourselves and outdoing the other guy, but the threat is always, it just takes one madman.
Well, I should tell you where the title comes from.
Okay.
Nixon really did have a theory about foreign policy and leadership, and he believed that if the president of the United States could convince the Soviet Union, our archenemy, that he, the president, was crazy, mad, in other words, crazy enough to start a nuclear war, that the other side would back down.
See, I got a problem with that.
So he really thought this, and when he did become president, in reality, 8 years later, he put it in. He tried it out a couple times, but so in my book, in the Madman Theory, he puts that theory to test during the Cuban Missile Crisis. So he tries
this is
to convince.
A really good look at. I know this is historical. This is something, to do with history, but I always think history is run by people, and it's good gossip, But it's a look at the human character. And
right.
It's amazing, what do we do under stress? We always talk about, I'm going to save this person's life. I would do this, I would do that. But then when it comes down to that moment, even look at President Obama in regards to getting bin Laden. There's that moment of, what do we do? Do we go for it now or not? being able to, he did a press event that night, and none of us knew what was going on in general public, but the next day it's like, boom, here's what happened. And even, there's people out there who don't believe it happened still, but whatever. But there's it's a stark reality. When you start looking at a nuclear explosion and missiles and, wow, what can really happen? I mean, it's huge. It's more than taking out someone like bin Laden. This is huge.
Yes. Basically, New York, all the major cities in the eastern U.S. at least were basically could have been destroyed.
Yeah. And just what's scary is you kind of have this idea that it's left up to one person, and you hope to hell they don't have a bad day. And I think that's why sometimes people don't vote for women as president, because it just might be that time of month, and there you go.
Well, luckily...
I'm going to get so many emails for that one.
But I couldn't say that, but you could say. Luckily...
I can say it. But you know what I'm saying? It's really, when you think about it, you're going to trust somebody that much.
Well, now, yeah, you're going to trust someone that much. Now, what about if Nixon's wife, now I know your book delves into that too, the relationship between the two of them.
Right.
So how does she feel about, what if he pulled that trigger,
Well, their relationship, which was a troubled relationship, to put it mildly, from almost from the beginning, because she hated politics. And here she is, like, married to a politician. So she hated being in the public eye. And she hated him for doing that to her. So in the book, their relationship sort of comes, and all their problems sort of come out during this crisis. And on the one hand, she has an instinct to be what in the late 50s, early 60s was considered the role of the good wife, to support her husband. On the other hand, she had these these beefs with him. So it all comes to a boil during this period when the missiles are discovered in Cuba.
Wow. And so there's you're in hot water no matter where you turn at that point. It's like, as a family too, and then looking, at your husband and how he handles something. I mean, they always talk about a great man has got a great woman behind him. And you start to look at this story and you're like, how did she really feel about him? Not much. And I think that's the interesting thing, that even going through an election process, there's the whole husband and wife team. That's a team. I mean, that is a big, playing card in the elections. And, at all the conferences, we've got Ann Romney going off, we've got Michelle Obama going off. And they're almost being the testimonial for their husbands.
You have to have a husband. You have to have at least 2 kids. You have to have a dog.
And
you have to go to church.
What about the poor single guys? I mean, a single guy could not run for president.
Well, yeah. I mean, think about it. It's so funny. And an atheist, like Jesse Ventura, wants to be president, but he's an atheist.
I vote for him. I think it's cool.
But
just saying,
a wrestler, that'd be fun.
Have you sent your book to Jesse Ventura? Because I'd be really interested to see what he thinks.
No, I haven't thought of him, but
well, but it is that image. You see, I think that's the other part of this whole story you have. Is our preconceived ideas of what and how a president should do, what their family life should be. We've decided what the typical presidential candidate should look like and be and act like, individually. And so it's like what you were saying, going right to the beginning about JFK. Here he was, a tan dude, like, hey, I like women,
with big hair.
But it is that preconceived idea that we have. I mean, where does all of that come from? I don't know if it's just that I wasn't here during that era and I didn't grow up here very long, but
well, it's part of the culture because it wasn't always true. I mean, we had some pretty uncharismatic presidents in the past, but they weren't, but we didn't have TV. And, when you go on TV, you have to look good. And that's just the way things are.
And now it's kind of progressed to American Idol.
Right.
I mean, because sometimes you think, are our presidents really I mean, they're more like movie stars.
Mm-hmm.
And now movie stars are getting into politics. It's kind of crossed over.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Nixon was like the opposite. I mean, he really hated being in public, basically, with people. He was a loner, and it's not a good character trait for a person in that job.
He looks like he hates everything and everyone.
Well, the picture on the cover of the book, I dug that up in the National Archives. It comes from a trip he made to Moscow when he was vice president, shortly before the election. And I don't know exactly what he's scowling at there, but
he looks pretty bad. He really does. I mean, he's like, I wouldn't want to mess with him.
and imagine, a lot of the book, takes place underground because they go to a shelter, which there's an alternate. You may not know this, but there's an alternate White House in Virginia in a mountain, and that's.
I thought that was just a theory.
No, it's really there, and that's where the president is supposed to go in case of an emergency, and it's apparently where Dick Cheney went. That was his secure, undisclosed location after 9/11.
Yeah, but if you know where it is, then it should be somewhere else.
Well, it was a secret until I think I forget what year it was. A plane crashed into the mountain where the shelter is buried, and it sort of came out that it was located there. But but you can't get anywhere near it, otherwise you'll be stopped pretty quickly.
It's like Area 51. There's no way you're going to get
there. Maybe that's
right.
where they really are.
But but it is interesting. And of course, our presidents do have to have that, and our representatives, they do have to have that hideout. Okay, so when you get into this, so as a child, I want to know, were you interested in politics and history as a child? How did this happen to you?
Well, in fact, the first thing I ever wrote was a letter to the editor of the newspaper where I grew up, which was in Pittsburgh, so the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I wrote a letter explaining in what I'm sure was excruciating detail how there was a debate at the time about anti-ballistic missiles. In other words, sort of missiles that would shoot down incoming missiles. And it was called ABM, Anti-Ballistic Missile System. And there was a big debate about whether we should build these missiles to protect our cities from Soviet missiles coming at us. And I made this argument about how it just wouldn't work. And so I went from that to writing about missiles in the Cuban Missile Crisis. So I think it's a nice parallel.
Do you ever think we'll be allowed to go to Cuba from America?
Well, I think that once after Castro passes away and his brother Raul, I think that things will eventually change there.
I really want to go.
But,
I really, really want to go.
But what I'm afraid of is it'll become just like Las Vegas.
Yeah.
But that's the way it sort of used to be. It used to be before
like Havana.
Castro. Havana was sort of the East Coast playground where you could do stuff that you couldn't get away with, other places.
There was an episode. I don't know if you watch Anthony Bourdain ever, but
no.
There was an episode of him going, and he was in Cuba. He got into Cuba, and you can, as a journalist, get there, and I'm working on that. Well, we have a 5-year national tour first.
You can get there. You just can't fly from the
Yeah,
States.
you're not allowed to have money and currency and everything. But he went there, and he met. Oh man, if you can find this, this episode, he went to Cuba, and it was just going through your information in your book. I'm like, oh my gosh, there was a guy that lived in Cuba. He was American from New York, and then everyone bailed. And I think it was during the whole Cuban Missile issue. Everyone bailed, and after Havana, all of that, everyone bailed. He stayed, and he was like, no way, I'm here. And he took all these photographs, and he has these photos of what was going on. I mean, it's a trip.
Oh.
So if you ever get to see that episode, check it out, because it's connected. It's really connected with what you're doing. I can't explain it very much because I'm blonde, but it's there. Go check it out. No, seriously.
Well,
it's really
Castro was
he was able to document all these things by photography, but it was, the Americans and part of the, politicians were like, oh, you can send it to here, or the government, but they kind of let him be without attacking, getting him in trouble. They let him be, but would use his photos.
So what are the photos of?
They had photos of what was going on in Cuba at that time, and I don't know. I have to go back and watch this because, I need to go back and watch it myself to be 100% accurate. But it was all during the same time frame.
Well, Castro was really eager for the Soviets to use the missiles that they put in Cuba and fire them at the U.S.
See, and that's exactly it, though, because he was at that point going, hey, screw you, you screwed me over here, so I can, blow you up. And that's where I think it becomes so easy. These, we look at guns and everything. It's not the gun. It's like who's going to pull that trigger, So sometimes you look at all of this and it becomes, it's war games.
I think it's just really scary, especially when you start looking at the Middle East. Because they have a whole different way of thinking about things that makes it, why people are frightened of them.
Right. And
it's should one person ever really have that kind of power, whether it's here or there?
Right. Well, if Iran gets the bomb, the decision about whether we should bomb Iran is sort of like the decision about Kennedy had about whether to bomb Cuba, because if you do it, well, then what happens next?
Yeah.
And we don't. It's hard to tell. And if we bomb Iran, well, maybe they'll obviously try to do something in retaliation.
I think that there's a
domino effect that can come from that.
I think that there and I think it would be good if we had a lot more intelligence and we did more kind of operations like taking out bin Laden, more of that kind of.
Well, there is some of that. I mean, we infected their. We tried to put a computer virus into their. We did put a computer virus into their nuclear plant operating system, and it basically caused the machinery to blow up.
Oh boy, you know what? We're going to have a whole other show. No, because I've got two other authors that have to come on a show with you, who talk about just how bad it does get like that, and it's serious. I mean, when you look at what can happen globally, how pretty much.
What would be cool?
Iran can hang out with what's going on in South America and blow us all up.
I think
and Brazil.
I think it'd be really way cool, not to make light of this, but I think it'd be cool to have a virus that would go into places like that with Honey Boo Boo.
Oh, no.
And that would teach everybody a lesson for the next 20 years.
And I can't believe you even mentioned that on our show.
No, seriously.
But, Harvey, I think it's the virus thing, too, that's also what's happening with Russia right now.
In how so?
In regards to tapping into, the government and also into just taking that. I mean, even if you look at right now, we're looking at what can, people can attack us and take out our entire electricity, all our electricity, our computer grids, and the whole thing could go down. Right.
Well, I think we're very vulnerable in that way to attack from China. China has a very sophisticated computer. I don't know what you would call it, offensive effort going on, and there's a lot going on that I mean, the Pentagon computers are basically being attacked all the time. I'm not saying they're successful attacks, but people are going after it, looking for secrets.
Yeah. No, it's serious stuff. I mean, we have a lot on our hands to look at of where we can be attacked, and it is changing up. But it all does stems from the whole nuclear side of it. I mean, it's creepy, Mm-hmm. And I remember when we lived in Kenya and South Africa, they were always talking about putting things in the water to kill everybody.
Oh,
that was the biggest threat there.
Oh, my gosh, in South Africa there was this whole big thing about something that would go into the water that would only kill black people.
Yep.
I mean, and we were like, oh, for God's sake. Really? You know, and living there, I just wanted to say that would take out half the white population because most of them were mixed anyway. Just saying, people.
Get over it.
Get over yourself. Because truth be told.
Right. Well, nuclear weapons do not discriminate.
Yeah, and it was just really, it's like, if everybody put an effort into getting along instead, maybe we get somewhere.
If we could all just get along.
Right.
Rodney,
that's like, that is part of the whole 60s movement too, right?
No, here we go.
Supposed to be. Harvey, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. I mean, it's been a fascinating conversation for sure.
Well, I wish we had more time.
And, I really want to put you on a show with these other two authors that I'm thinking of because it does I'm not trying to, scare people, but I think people need to kind of realize that there are these threats and understand a little bit more than what we get to see all the time. And just it's kind of your book gets people to think and not just stay with, oh, this is cozy.
Well, it's not about voting for the hair.
Yeah.
Well,
but then
it worked.
Got hair? It's all good. I'm going to start. Well, I don't know about no, I'm not going there. We won't talk about politics in this year. But Harvey, seriously, a great pleasure having you on the show, and I think definitely we'll talk again soon because I really would like to put you with these other couple of authors that have been they're just doing it in a completely other side, different case studies as well, and in novels too. So I think this would be great. Again, everyone, Madman Theory, the Madman Theory by Harvey Simon is on paperback. It's an ebook. You can get it on Amazon.com and Barnes & Noble, but also go right to his website, madmantheory.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.
Take care.
Good stuff. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.